Just take a second and think about the last couple of years. The world we're living in right now, it's a totally different place than it was before 2020. And this change, it wasn't some slow, gradual evolution. No, it was a rapid, almost violent transformation. So today, we're going to dive into a framework for how to navigate this wild new reality. Because if the world has changed this much, shouldn't we?
All right, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to unpack the huge ways our world has been reshaped. Then, we'll zoom right in on how all that disruption is actually a personal doorway to growth. From there, we'll get super practical with 3 powerful questions to guide your own transformation. And finally, we'll connect all the dots between your inner world and the impact you have on the outer world.
Okay, first up, let's really set the stage and look at just how much things have been turned upside down. This wasn't a gentle shift, right? It felt more like someone slammed on the brakes, a sudden system reset. And now we're at this really critical turning point, not just as a society, but for each of us as individuals.
At the peak of the crisis, economies just got hammered. In places like Australia and New Zealand, job markets were slashed by 30%. 30%! And the share markets, they plunged by the exact same amount. This wasn't some little dip. It was a sudden, sharp economic shock to the system.
And it was so much more than just the economy. We saw the digitization of, everything hit warp speed. We watched all this chaos and upheaval in the streets, on the news every night. We even got a taste of it ourselves. Remember the panic buying in supermarkets? All of this uncertainty, it forced us to look at the world in a new way, to ask some much harder questions of our leaders and the very systems they run.
But here's the thing to remember through all this disruption. Every single one of these massive changes, social, political, economic, it wasn't just something that happened to us. No, these were driven by the combined actions of millions and millions of individuals. It's just a really powerful reminder that all big, sweeping change starts on a personal level. It starts with you, and it starts with me.
So, if global change really starts with us, then it makes sense that this period of global disruption also created a pretty unique opportunity for us. So let's dig into how the chaos of the outside world actually opened up a gateway for personal growth, because let's be real, all that quiet time had a huge impact on our inner lives. The speaker in our source material, he shares this really personal story. He'd been in his field for a decade, and suddenly he's locked down, all alone in a new country. His career path was totally up in the air after leaving a fantastic job he'd had for 11 years. He just felt pent up, disillusioned, and honestly, just deeply confused about what his future looked like. And out of that whole experience came this incredible realization. That feeling of being lost, it wasn't a sign that he was failing. It was actually the exact opposite. It was a clear signal that he was finally on a new path, one he hadn't explored before. The confusion itself was the proof that he was growing. So the big question is, how do we take that confusion and actively turn it into clarity? Well, that's exactly what this next part is all about. We're going to unpack a simple but really powerful toolkit for self-discovery. But before we even get to the questions, we got to set ourselves up for success. And the recipe is super simple. Once a week, just find a quiet spot, grab a pen and paper, and, this is the important part, ditch the phone. And then you just write. It's a tiny investment of time, but believe me, the payback in clarity and direction is absolutely massive. All right, the very first question is all about subtraction. It's about decluttering your mind. Because to make space for a new future, you first have to consciously decide to let go of the things that just aren't serving you anymore.
And this is actually backed up by this really simple change model from an organizational theorist named Richard Burkhardt. See, we all move from a current state through a transition to a future state. Now, you'd think the scariest part would be the unknown future state, right? But the research shows the most painful step is right at the very beginning, the act of letting go of what's familiar.
So what are we looking for? Well, you have to scan your inner world for these little gremlins. Where are you holding on to some belief that limits you? Where are you blaming someone else, or maybe even blaming yourself for a mistake in the past? Find them, acknowledge them, and then write about them until you find the lesson. That is how you turn these imperfections into real wisdom. Okay, so once you've made some space, you are ready for question number 2. And this one is all about addition. It's time to identify, own, and even celebrate the unique strengths, your superpowers, that you're going to carry forward with you. Now, this takes a pretty big mental shift. So many of us, we're basically programmed to be our own worst critics, right? We're always focused on our weaknesses, on where we have gaps. The new focus is all about your strengths. What lights you up?
Where do you find that amazing state of flow, where time just disappears and what you're doing feels totally effortless? That's where your superpowers live.
And to dig a little deeper, just ask why you're good at those things. So, for example, maybe you give great advice. Okay, why? Well, maybe it's because you're a fantastic listener or a really clear communicator. Those core skills, those authentic human gifts, those are your superpowers. And they are the very things that technology can never, ever replace.
And that brings us to our final question, which kind of bridges the gap between all our inner work and the outer world. Because after all this reflection, we've got to connect back with other people. So much has changed around us, but our fundamental need for human connection, that's timeless. You know, expanding connection doesn't require some huge, grand gesture. It's about the small, powerful actions that make the world just a little bit better, one moment at a time. A smile to a stranger, a simple compliment, basic courtesy. These tiny acts, they ease the tension in society, and they remind all of us of our shared humanity.
So let's tie all of this together. Our final section is really about the payoff. It's about how this commitment to doing the inner work creates this powerful ripple effect in the world all around you.
Viktor Frankl absolutely nailed this timeless truth. When we're faced with circumstances that are difficult or messy or just plain annoying, things we can't control, our real power lies in taking responsibility for our own transformation. Trying to resist what's happening on the outside never moves things forward, but building your own self-awareness always will.
In this chart just lays out the direct link between those three questions and the world you help create. It's so clear. When you let go of what's holding you back, you create more room for compassion. When you lean into your superpowers, you can't help but inspire the people around you. And when you intentionally expand your connection to others, you are literally actively building a world that you're proud to live in. So, we end right back where we started. This incredible and kind of crazy world transformation has opened up a pathway to self-discovery for every single one of us. It's an invitation to grow, to let go, and to connect more deeply than ever before. The only question left is, will you accept it?